So if a movie called The Mummy doesn't exactly have a mummy, can it really be called The Mummy? These are the questions I have. Lee Cronin's The Mummy. Let's talk about it. What is going on, y'all? It is Foos here. Today we are going to talk about Lee Cronin's The Mummy. And I'm excited about this one because this was one of my most highly anticipated movies coming in 2026. I think it was in my top five most anticipated. I was really looking forward to seeing what they did with this movie. I'm a big fan of anything ancient Egypt, especially in a horror sense like this. It's always been super cool and super fascinating to me. So this movie had me written all over it, and I'll say right out of the gate, it didn't disappoint. I had a good time with this movie. There's a lot of things I think to like about it, and some scenes that really stuck with me after first watch, and yeah, definitely looking forward to rewatching this one. Even though it does take a unique approach, that you could argue whether or not this is more of a possession movie than anything else, and I'd say you have a very valid point there. All that considered, I still had a really good time with this movie. Um, yeah, this is not going to be spoiler free though. So if you have not seen this movie already, now would be a good time to stop this. Wait till you check the movie out, and then come back and watch this because we're just going to dive right into all our thoughts and reactions on this one. So Lee Cronin's The Mummy kind of centers around this young girl, Katie, and her family. And Katie goes missing, is abducted, and ultimately used in like a ritualistic sacrifice sort of mummification process to trap this ancient Egyptian demon known as the Nazmaranian. So she kind of becomes a vessel, so to speak, to trap this evil entity. And she disappears for about 8 years, I think it is in the movie, before her family ultimately finds her as this sarcophagus that she's being contained in is part of a plane crash and she's discovered. When they find Katie, she is in no way, shape, or form anything similar to the little girl that went missing. She's in a catatonic state, as they describe it, very almost like feral in a sense, So, as you could imagine, somebody would be after being trapped and put in that situation for 8 years as a child. So, she's not in good condition. Not to mention, there's a demon inside her. But that's when shit kind of starts to go into the possession movie territory on this one. She starts to slowly but surely, as she's kind of let out of her bindings, which are ultimately what we learn is trapping this demon inside of her, then shit starts to hit the fan. The other kids in the family start to become affected. There's a lot of pretty gory shit that goes on in this one that I won't spoil in all details there. But yeah, ultimately, the way that we have to find our solution to this movie is our father and husband Charlie is a willing sacrifice to ultimately allow this demon to become a new host for this demon essentially. So he becomes our mummy towards the end of this movie, and we get this all sort of I'll get into the endings in a little more detail here, so we'll leave it at that. But diving right into the positive aspects of this movie and stuff that stood out for me is first of all the performance that we get for Larissa, who is Charlie's wife and the mother of Katie. She played by I think Leah Costa in this movie, if I have the name correctly. She absolutely kills it. Incredible performance throughout this movie. And I mean, as a character, this woman's going through it. I mean, her daughter goes missing while she's at work, so she has no, she's not on her watch or anything like that, so she doesn't have that sort of control. So there is definitely a resentment that she starts to show towards her husband that is addressed in the movie at one point even. But that all of that's played really well, and she goes through this wave of emotions. Like in the early part of the movie, obviously, but once Katie even is brought back, obviously there's a lot of gravity to that in and of itself that she plays really well. But again, there's this roller coaster of emotions that she goes through with dealing with Katie once she is back. That I feel like she's absolutely killed it in this role. And I'll save another point about her kind of towards the end as well. But felt like that performance by Leah Costa as Larissa was a huge positive in this movie and something that I thought about quite a bit after watching it the first time. Moving on to another thing that stuck with me quite a bit after watching the first time is one of the scenes in this movie that of the couple that I mentioned. It's when the magician is abducting Katie. we get this whole scene where Katie's out in the backyard and she's kind of playing and back there by herself, and the magician kind of pops up outside of the fence and starts talking to her, and ultimately gives her some candy and and a nectarine. I think at some point is what it is. I think that she gives her, but either way, point aside, the whole vibe of this scene just had a feeling to it for me. I don't know, it's just a weird, eerie tension because you know something bad is going to happen to the girl, and it's human nature to not want to see that happen, obviously. And I don't know, I just had an eerie tension, and this woman, the magician, again, another role played extremely well in this movie. I feel like she killed it, especially in this scene. But she had just a super creepy vibe about her that I couldn't quite shake after watching that scene. And the whole tent, after she kidnaps Katie ultimately, and she's running off with her, the dad is realizing what's going on around the same time. And you know, ultimately we get this scene where he starts running her down. He sees her off in the distance, and there's a little bit of a chase that goes on that's done really, really well there too, as he ultimately loses her because a sandstorm rolls in as he's trying to find her. That's a chaotic scene that is done really well at that point as well. I loved everything about this whole abduction sequence and the chase that ensued afterwards. That whole sequence really stuck with me. Another thing that I'll point out in a positive as far as scenes that stick with you in this one is we get a moment where our detective, who has been working in Egypt trying to help with all the details of this case and everything, she ultimately stumbles upon the evidence that shows what happened to Katie during this whole mummification process, and she feels the need to show the family what happened. So we get a scene where she travels to them after finding all of this and learning what's happened, and she shows them the video of this whole ritualistic sort of mummification ceremony that they do to Katie. And I think it's just because it's a child that you're watching in this sequence, but that scene kind of tough. It's one of those ones you watch and it's like, yeah, I'm not saying I'm uncomfortable, like I don't want to watch this in that sense, but it's just one of those ones that evokes a certain type of feeling and a certain tension when you're watching it, and it definitely had an effect on me watching this one, and I thought about it afterwards for a good little bit. Those two scenes definitely stuck out in a strong way in this movie for me. I don't know if it's just the nature of having kids myself or what, but this movie also really did a great job of attaching that human element and sort of the stakes in that sense to it. I felt the whole time watching this movie a strong investment for wanting to see some sort of positive result for this family. And that brings me to kind of our ending, which is the last positive thing I'll point out here about this one. And kind of probably the most satisfying ending ultimately that I think I've seen in a movie in quite some time. Takes a bit to get there, and you don't think you're going to, but when you do, it's fantastic. And so, what happens kind of early in this movie, to backtrack a little bit, when Katie is still around before she's abducted, her and her father are having this moment where he's helping her learn this Morse code stuff for she's clearly like a Girl Scout or something of that nature. And so we fast forward after all the shit's gone on and everything has happened. There's ultimately what cracks the evidence for finding the magician and all of the stuff and everything like that is Katie communicating through Morse code to her dad while trapped, so to speak, inside of herself. But then the Morse code comes into play again at the end. And basically, as I said earlier, Charlie sacrifices himself to become the host, and that way his daughter can be freed and his family can live on that way. So we get Charlie in this sort of casket situation in the basement at the end of this movie, or at least what you think is going to be the end of this movie, and it's a heavy scene in this in because it calls back to all the stuff I just mentioned. Because Katie is sitting down in the basement next to the casket, and she's talking to her dad through the casket through Morse code taps, and he's telling him that he loves him and all that. And you're like, oh man, don't tell me this is how this ends for this family. Again, the stakes. I was invested in this, but it wasn't. They weren't done yet. This movie ended on such a satisfying note because we get that scene, it cuts away from there, and then what we see next is Larissa communicating via phone with our detective who's back in Egypt now again at this point. And we learn at this point in the movie that the magician, whom we thought got killed in an earlier altercation between her and the detective. She didn't. She's now incarcerated in some type of, police, mental health, whatever type. She's locked up, let's just say. And we cut to her, and the nice little detail is the song that's playing in her cell is the same song that is playing when we're introduced to her character at the very beginning of the movie with this whole scene in her car with her own family. The fact that that song is playing on the radio, once you see the movie, it makes sense. It's just kind of a sweet little touch. Um, just making this woman as miserable as possible is great at this point. And then she is laying there in her bed, and she thinks what's coming in is a nurse of some sort, whatever. It's not, though. It's Larissa. It's our vengeful mother and wife, and she comes in and she pulls the medical mask down off of her face, and she looks at the magician who's lying there in the bed, and she looks at her and she goes, "You know my face. You basically you know who I am. You know my daughter." Like this, like, bitch, you know what's about to happen here type of moment, and it's so great. And then right after that, we look to the door, and here comes Charlie being rolled in the wheelchair by the detective, and he's all mummified looking and everything. And the door just closes, and we know what's happening, and it's great. So it's left to be implied that Charlie's going to be fine, if his family is going to be whole again, and the justice is going to go to the one that deserves it, so to speak. And I got a really a good kick out of the way this movie ended. I was really happy with it, and it was able to make me like gloss over a lot of the stuff that I didn't like about this movie, which we'll segue to now. And I'm going to be honest, everything about this movie that I dislike centers around one element, and that is the possession element. And I know I'm going to sound ridiculous as somebody who is on the record for saying that my favorite movie of all time is The Exorcist, but I will use this movie as my opportunity to say this. The possession genre as a whole is exhausted for me. Some of the same tired shit that we see in every possession movie, I could live without at this point. And this movie fell victim to a good amount of it, whether it's the contortionist, back breaking, bone breaking little stuff that we always have to see, or what's probably the one I'm going to vent about the most. The thing that I cannot stand in these possession movies anymore is the need for these possessed characters to always have to not only say something unnecessarily obscene, but just cringy and stupid a lot of times. Like, well, I get it. In 1973, in The Exorcist, Linda Blair, as a possessed child, said some off the wall shit. But that was in 1973 with a much less desensitized audience and without the long list of examples of it being done in other cases. It's a different landscape now. This stuff does not hit the same, and I know I can't be alone in this when I say that every time you hear a child just throw out. I'm not even going to repeat any of it, but some of the stuff that you see in some of these movies is like, is it really getting the effect that it's supposed to at this point? I personally don't think so. I'm not going to say that there maybe can't be a way to still do some possession movies and maybe just change up the tropes a little bit. Just do some different shit. Find a different way to convey this person being fucking off somehow. Yeah, but those are definitely the things that I didn't like about the movie. The possession tropes that were exhibited on a pretty large scale. We had some kids saying some wild shit in this movie. We had the possessed daughter Katie just saying weird shit for the sake of weird shit. Yeah, I mean, that's stuff I could live without, to be honest, at this point. I'm just kind of over some of the silly possession stuff. But overall, it was not enough to take away from all the things I do like about this movie. As I said at the beginning, this was a great time. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to watching it again. If you haven't checked out Lee Cronin's The Mummy, I don't know why you've watched through this whole video to this point, but go ahead and check that shit out. It's definitely worth a watch. But that's all I got on this one. If you've stuck with me for this long, as always, hit that subscribe button for me. Check out some other videos that we got on the channel, and be on the lookout for the next one. We'll see you.